My ex-girlfriend faked a pregnancy to trap me. I played along for 9 months. Some people will do anything to keep you. My ex-girlfriend, when faced with me leaving her for good, didn't cry or beg. She did something far more calculated. She looked me dead in the eye and told me she was pregnant with my child. What she didn't know was that her desperate move was the beginning of a game she was destined to lose, and I was about to become the most supportive, documented, and attentive fake father-to-be in history. The relationship with Sarah had been a slow-burning car crash I'd refused to get out of for 2 years. It was the little things at first, the constant need to know my whereabouts, the subtle digs at my friends, the way she'd accidentally wear my favorite hoodie until it smelled more like her than me. It was a slow erosion of my independence, a control tightening so gradually I didn't notice the walls going up until I was completely enclosed. The final straw wasn't a single event, but a quiet realization one Tuesday night. I was sitting on the couch, watching a show she hated, and I saw the look on her face. It wasn't just disapproval. It was a calculated assessment, like a predator figuring out how to isolate its prey. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me, that I had to get out. The breakup conversation was exactly as I'd predicted. Tears, accusations, threats of self-harm, and then, finally, a chilling calm. She told me I was making the biggest mistake of my life. I packed a bag and left, feeling a mix of guilt and profound relief, like a man who'd just escaped a sinking ship. For 3 days, there was silence. I started to breathe again, to feel like myself. I ignored her 53 missed calls and the barrage of texts that ranged from pleading to furious. On the 4th day, my phone buzzed. It was her. I let it go to voicemail. But a minute later, a text came through. It was short, direct, and designed to detonate my entire world. I'm pregnant. It's yours. We need to talk. My blood ran cold. I knew Sarah. I knew her capacity for manipulation, for weaving elaborate narratives to get what she wanted. And I knew, with every fiber of my being, that this was the ultimate lie, the final, desperate gambit to pull me back into her web. A normal person might panic, might get angry, might immediately demand proof. But I had spent 2 years learning how Sarah operated. Direct confrontation was her arena. She thrived on the drama, the he said she said, the emotional chaos. If I called her a liar, she would turn it into a performance of wounded betrayal, and I'd be the monster who abandoned his pregnant girlfriend. No, that wasn't the way. A different idea began to form in my mind, a dangerous, slow-burning plan. If she wanted to play a role, I would hand her the script, the costume, and the stage. I would become the most devoted, loving, and excited father-to-be she could have ever wished for. I would play along, not for weeks, but for the entire 9 months. I would document everything, every craving, every doctor's appointment, every lie. I would give her all the rope she needed to hang herself. I picked up my phone and typed back a simple, devastating reply. I'm on my way over. The game was afoot. Walking back into that apartment was like stepping into a parallel universe. The air was thick with a manufactured tension. Sarah was on the couch, a blanket strategically draped over her stomach, her face a perfect mask of fragile anxiety. She had a box of tissues on the coffee table, a prop for the performance to come. She didn't jump up or shout. She just looked at me with wide, tear-filled eyes and whispered that she'd taken 3 tests, all positive. I sat down opposite her. My expression a carefully crafted blend of shock, concern, and dawning responsibility. I didn't press for details. I just listened. I let her tell me how scared she was, how she knew this was a sign we were meant to be together, how this baby would fix everything. Inside, my mind was a sterile, quiet office, filing away every inconsistency. She mentioned morning sickness that started exactly at 6 weeks, a textbook detail she'd clearly Googled. She talked about cravings for pickles and ice cream, a cliché so blatant it was almost insulting. I nodded. I held her hand. I told her we would figure this out together. I was giving her the Oscar-winning performance of a terrified but committed man. The key to my plan was documentation. The next day, I went to an office supply store and bought a thick, black binder and a pack of divider tabs. On the spine, in neat white letters, I wrote, Baby Project Case File. It felt both absurd and necessary. The first section was labeled Initial Disclosure. Inside, I transcribed our entire conversation from memory, noting her exact phrasing, her pauses, The way she avoided eye contact when she mentioned the due date she'd calculated. I started a new section, financial planning. I created a spreadsheet, projecting the costs of diapers, formula, childcare, and a larger apartment. I presented it to Sarah a week later, telling her I wanted to be prepared. Her face flickered with annoyance. This wasn't the romantic, tearful reunion she'd scripted. She wanted emotional surrender, not a budget meeting. I insisted it was important for me to feel in control. The next logical step, I told her, was a doctor's appointment to confirm everything and start prenatal care. This was the first real test. Her hesitation was palpable. She said she'd already made an appointment with her own doctor, a woman she trusted, and it was just a formality. I knew I couldn't let her control the narrative from a clinic where she might have a friend or a sympathetic ear. I smiled and told her that was great, but I had already done some research and found a highly rated OB/GYN group that specialized in early prenatal care. I'd even made a consultation appointment for us. For the following Tuesday, I watched her, saw the trap closing in. She couldn't say no without looking like she was hiding something. She agreed, but the look in her eyes was pure venom. She knew I was changing the rules of her game, and she didn't like it one bit. The waiting room of the women's health clinic was a sterile sea of pastel colors and anxious faces. Sarah sat rigidly beside me, flipping through a magazine without actually reading it. She was dressed in a slightly baggy sweater, another attempt at a visual prop. When the nurse called her name, I stood up, my hand resting protectively on the small of her back. I was playing the part, so well I was starting to scare myself. Inside the examination room, the atmosphere grew even more tense. The nurse, a no-nonsense woman with a kind smile, took Sarah's medical history. I sat in a chair in the corner, notebook open on my lap, pen poised. I looked like an eager, supportive partner. I was actually a private investigator. The nurse asked routine questions about Sarah's last menstrual cycle, any known allergies, her family medical history. Sarah's answers were smooth, practiced. Too smooth. Then came the moment of truth. The nurse explained that the doctor would be in shortly to perform a transvaginal ultrasound to confirm the pregnancy, check for a heartbeat, and establish a due date. I saw Sarah's hands clench in her lap. This was it. The lie was about to be exposed by medical science. A young doctor entered, introduced herself as Dr. Evans, and got straight to business. She explained the procedure while Sarah laid back on the table, her face pale. I watched the monitor as the doctor performed the ultrasound. My heart was pounding, not with the excitement of a potential father, but with the thrill of a hunter closing in on his prey. Dr. Evans moved the wand around, her brow furrowed slightly. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she looked up at Sarah, her expression neutral but professional. She said the gestational sac was a bit smaller than she'd expect for the dates Sarah had given her, which could simply mean the dates were off. She couldn't find a heartbeat yet, but again, she said, it might just be too early. It was a masterpiece of medical ambiguity. It was the perfect out. Sarah seized it, nodding tearfully, saying she knew her dates were probably wrong. I saw the flicker of relief in her eyes. Dr. Evans scheduled a follow-up ultrasound for 2 weeks later, a time frame that gave Sarah plenty of room to maneuver. As we left the office, Sarah was quiet. I put my arm around her, telling her not to worry, that everything would be fine. But in my case file, back at my apartment, I was writing a new entry. Chapter 3. The Inconclusive Ultrasound. I noted the doctor's exact words, the size of the sac, and the lack of a heartbeat. I also noted Sarah's performance, the perfect, preemptive tears, the way she controlled the narrative. I knew I couldn't rely on doctors who were cautious and bound by patient confidentiality. I needed to introduce a new element, a variable Sarah couldn't possibly control. I needed a real expert, someone who knew the script of pregnancy inside and out. I needed my sister, Emily, the labor and delivery nurse. Inviting my sister Emily over for dinner was a strategic masterstroke, if I did say so myself. Emily had been a labor and delivery nurse for over a decade. She'd seen it all, the genuine miracles, the surprise arrivals, and yes, even the women who faked symptoms for various reasons. She had a built-in BS detector that was finely tuned to a razor's edge. I framed the dinner as a casual, I have some big news get-together. Sarah was initially against it, not wanting to share our news so soon, but I insisted, telling her how important Emily's support would be. It was another test she couldn't fail. Over a tense meal of lasagna, I dropped the bombshell. Emily's reaction was perfect. A gasp, a hug for both of us, tears welling in her eyes. She was genuinely thrilled for me. Then, she turned her full, professional attention to Sarah. The interrogation began subtly, with the gentle, knowing questions of a seasoned nurse. She asked Sarah how she was feeling. Sarah launched into her well-rehearsed monologue about morning sickness. Emily nodded sympathetically, then asked a killer question. "Oh, I'm so sorry, that's the worst. Are you finding it's worse in the morning, or does it hit you more in the afternoon?" It was a simple, innocuous question, but it was a trap. Real morning sickness has patterns. Sarah, who had only Googled the symptom, not the experience, hesitated for a fraction of a second too long. "Oh, you know," she said vaguely. It comes and goes." Emily's smile didn't falter, but I saw a flicker in her eyes. She knew. Then Emily moved on to other symptoms. "Any crazy cravings yet?" With my first, I couldn't get enough of chalk. I'd just sit there and gnaw on it. Another test. Sarah laughed a little too loudly. "Just pickles and ice cream. The classic stuff." It was the answer from a movie, not from a real life. The dinner continued, a quiet duel between my sister's gentle probing and Sarah's defensive evasions. After Sarah went to the bathroom, a trip she took whenever the questions got too close, Emily looked at me, her expression grave. She didn't say a word, just gave me a slight, almost imperceptible shake of her head. That was all the confirmation I needed. A week later, the morning sickness escalated. Or rather, the performance of it did. Sarah would run to the bathroom at the most convenient times, usually right after I'd suggested we do something she didn't want to do, like go for a walk or visit my parents. But I never heard anything. No retching, no heaving, just the sound of the faucet running. One afternoon, I forgot my wallet in the bedroom and walked in just as she was standing in front of the bathroom mirror, making quiet, gagging noises at her own reflection. She froze, her eyes wide with panic, when she saw me in the doorway. I quickly apologized and backed out, but the image was seared into my brain. It was so pathetic, so desperate. That night, I made a new entry in my binder, this one with a printout of an article I'd found, Psychosomatic and Factitious Pregnancy. I was no longer just gathering evidence. I was building a psychological profile. The pregnancy was progressing, but so was my case. It was time to raise the stakes. It was time for the sonogram picture. The second ultrasound appointment was approaching, and I could feel the anxiety radiating off Sarah in waves. She knew she couldn't fake another inconclusive result. The day before the appointment, she surprised me with a gift. It was a small, framed picture. A sonogram. I took it from her, my face a mask of awe and wonder, while inside, my mind was already racing. The image was grainy, black and white, and looked vaguely like a jelly bean. It was perfect. Too perfect. Sarah told me her story with practiced, breathless excitement. She said she'd had some spotting and gotten worried, so she'd gone to a local walk-in clinic that had a small ultrasound machine. The kind nurse, she said, had taken pity on her and printed out the picture for free. It was a brilliant lie, designed to preempt the real doctor's appointment. If the doctor couldn't find anything, Sarah could claim she'd had a miscarriage, turning her into the victim and me into the insensitive jerk for not being more supportive. But she had made a critical error. She'd handed me a physical piece of evidence. As soon as she was asleep that night, I was at my computer, scanning the image at a high resolution. I uploaded it to a reverse image search engine. Nothing. Then I tried different search terms: early pregnancy sonogram, 6-week ultrasound picture, fake ultrasound template. And there it was. On a website selling prank sonograms for a few bucks, was the exact same image. Same angle, same jelly bean shape, same pixelation. I downloaded it, printed it out, and added it to my case file under a new tab, Exhibit A, Fraudulent Sonogram. The next day, I played my part. I gushed over the picture, telling Sarah how I was going to carry it in my wallet. I even posted it on my private social media, with a caption about our little jelly bean. I was making the lie public, tying her to it. She was trapped. At the real appointment with Dr. Evans, I watched as the ultrasound wand moved over Sarah's stomach. This time, there was no ambiguity. Dr. Evans turned the screen toward us. There was nothing there. An empty uterus. She looked at Sarah with profound sympathy and delivered the news we both knew was coming, but for entirely different reasons. It appeared there had never been a pregnancy. She spoke about chemical pregnancies, early miscarriages, how common they were. Sarah's performance was heartbreaking. She sobbed, she wailed, she collapsed into my arms. I held her, stroking her hair, whispering words of comfort, all while thinking, the curtain has fallen. The lie was officially dead, but the game wasn't over. Sarah had invested too much to just let it go. As we left the clinic, her tears subsiding into quiet, shuddering breaths, I knew she was already formulating her next move. She was the victim now, and she would use that status to its fullest extent. But I had one final, devastating act to play. I was going to take her victimhood and use it to build my own case, setting a trap from which she could never, ever escape. The aftermath of the miscarriage was a masterclass in emotional manipulation. Sarah was fragile, weepy, and clung to me with a desperation that was both suffocating and, for my plan, incredibly useful. She used the tragedy to suggest we get back together, to heal from this loss as a couple. My friends thought I was insane for even considering it. My sister Emily pulled me aside and begged me to run. But I had to see it through. I had to push the lie to its absolute, logical conclusion. So, I agreed to move back in. It was the ultimate test. If she was truly grieving, the reality of living together would be a comfort. If she was a liar, it would become a prison of her own making. The first few weeks were a delicate dance. I was the doting, grieving partner, bringing her tea, ordering her favorite food, and listening patiently as she recounted the trauma of our loss. I even suggested we go to couples counseling to process our grief. She hated the idea, of course, because a therapist would be another expert she couldn't fool. I dropped it, but the suggestion served its purpose. It made me look like I was trying to build a healthy future, while she was stuck in the past. Living with her was like being on a movie set where only one person knew the script. I'd come home and find her on the couch, a pillow stuffed under her shirt, resting. I'd find pregnancy websites in her browser history, not for information, but for stories about miscarriage trauma she could use. My case file grew thicker. I had a new section, post-miscarriage performance. I documented her moods, her sudden recoveries when something fun was on TV, the way she'd forget to be sad when she thought I wasn't looking. The pressure was clearly getting to her. She became irritable, starting fights over nothing. It was the classic tactic of an abuser. Create chaos to deflect from your own lies. I knew the endgame had to be big. It had to be an event so public, so undeniable, that her entire charade would collapse in on itself. I started planting seeds. I left a pamphlet for a remembrance ceremony for lost babies on the coffee table. I talked about starting a small memorial garden in the backyard. I was building a narrative of a couple moving through grief together, a narrative that was becoming a cage around her. The final piece of the trap was the most audacious. I told her I had been so moved by our experience that I had signed us up to speak at a local pregnancy loss support group meeting. I said it would be cathartic for us to share our story and help others. I watched the color drain from her face. This was it. The ultimate stage. A room full of people who had actually experienced loss. An audience that would see through her performance in a heartbeat. She couldn't back out without looking like a terrible person, but she couldn't go through with it without being exposed. She was cornered. The meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday evening, exactly 9 months after she had first told me she was pregnant. The circle was closing. The final countdown had begun. The night of the support group meeting, the atmosphere in our apartment was thick enough to cut with a knife. Sarah was pale, moving around like a ghost. She tried every excuse she could think of. She had a headache. She felt sick. She didn't think she was emotionally ready. For each excuse, I had a calm, loving, and utterly immovable response. I told her it was normal to be scared, that I would be right there with her, that we didn't have to say much, just listen. I was the supportive partner from hell. And she knew it. As we got into the car to drive to the community center where the meeting was held, she finally broke. She burst into tears, but these were different tears. They weren't the performative sobs I'd seen for months. They were the raw, ugly sounds of a person who had reached the absolute end of their rope. She didn't confess in the car. She waited until we were parked outside the lit-up building, a sign with hope and healing circle visible through the glass doors. She turned to me, her face streaked with mascara, and the entire story came pouring out. It wasn't a neat confession. It was a torrent of words, a jumbled mess of desperation, jealousy, and fear. She admitted she'd never been pregnant. She'd bought the test online, one that could be easily manipulated. She'd faked the doctor's appointments, the sonogram, the morning sickness, all of it. She said she was just so scared of losing me, so sure that this was the only way to make me stay, that she didn't know how to stop once she started. The lies had taken on a life of their own. I didn't say a word. I just let her talk. When she was finished, she sat there, sobbing, completely deflated. The performance was over. The actor had left the stage. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel angry. I just felt a profound, hollow sense of pity. I reached into my bag and pulled out my black binder. I didn't open it. I just placed it on the dashboard between us. I know, Sarah, I said, my voice quiet. I've known for a long time. Her sobbing stopped. She stared at the binder, then at me, her eyes wide with a new kind of terror, the terror of being truly, completely seen. I told her I was leaving, for good this time. I told her I wouldn't be sharing the story with our mutual friends, or her family, or posting it online. My victory wasn't in public shaming, it was in my freedom. I got out of the car, called a cab, and left her there with the ghost of her lie. The next day, I packed up the last of my things from the apartment. The binder went into a box, a souvenir of the strangest 9 months of my life. I didn't look back. Walking away, I wasn't thinking about Sarah's punishment or my own cleverness. I was thinking about the quiet, simple feeling of the air on my face, unburdened by her lies. The game was over. I had won, not by trapping her, but by finally setting myself free.